Hello, welcome everyone to Global Entrepreneurship Week. We are super excited that you're joining us this year in 2020. We have today a few different speakers and sessions, so hopefully you check them out. Right now in particular, we have a very special guest, the chairman and founder of OpenEXO, of Exponential Organizations, Salim Ismail, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about why it's important to think about exponential organizations and how you can apply them to yourself. So without further ado, thank you so much, Salim. Welcome.
Great to be here, and thank you so much, Stephen. Let me share my screen, folks, and I'm going to go through some slides. But more importantly, if you have questions, please store them up, because we'll have some. I'm going to leave some time for Q&A as we get into this. I tend to get a ton of questions. Quite simply, this is the single best time in history to be an entrepreneur. Why? Because the status quo has suddenly gotten slammed by both Corona and technology, and every major organization and every major corporation in the world is going to struggle with this. And I'll explain why I'm excited about that. Clearly, the world operates on a Corona and post-pandemic reality today, and how we see the world going forward. A bit about my background for those who are not aware. I'm originally from India, grew up and did schooling and university in Canada, went to Europe for 10 years, and then was in the US for 20 years and back in Canada now. So I'm quite confused. My journey really starts 15 years ago. I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, running their incubator. Learned a fundamental lesson that when you try disruptive innovation in a large organization, the immune system attacks you. And the more disruptive you are, the more the antibodies attack you. And what struck me was you could expect this at a bank or a telco, but Yahoo was like 10 years old. Why should it have this problem? I went from that to helping build out Singularity University, which many of you may be aware of. I'm the founding CEO there, built it out for 7-8 years in various roles, led most of the programs. And then I wrote a book called Exponential Organizations. And the thesis behind EXOs is that we've learned how to scale technology, but building the org structure is painfully incremental and linear. And how do you build the org structure as seamlessly and the one that can scale as fast as technology can scale? I'm now on the board of the X Prize Foundation, and I'm a venture partner at a venture fund as well. Really, this is the money slide from a technology perspective I want you to be aware of. Ray Kurzweil put this together, and it's a chart of Moore's Law. And he goes all the way back to 1900 and finds that we've been doubling computational price performance for more than 100 years, way before Gordon Moore made his predictions. And the question that Ray asked when he saw this data is, why is this curve so smooth and so predictable? Through wars, recessions, ups and downs in the semiconductor industry, we see this incredibly steady, rhythmic 18-month doubling pattern. And he spent 10 years researching this to understand why, came up with a very fundamental observation that now drives the thinking of many people around the world, which is once you take any domain, discipline, industry area, product area, technology, and you power it with information technologies, the price performance starts doubling. Most important, when that doubling pattern starts, and once it has started, it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. And that's very hard for us to get our heads around, because we think cognitively it must slow down at some point. It just can't keep going. But in computation, for example, we've had multiple technologies like relays, vacuum tubes, transistors, integrated circuits. You can think of each one kind of as an S-curve, where a technology takes off, accelerates, reaches its upper limits. But if you have an information-based environment, something else takes over the curve. We're actually coming to the end of integrated circuits now, but now we have 3D chip design, optical computing, quantum computing ready to take over the curve, and we think Moore's Law just keeps going the way it has. This led Peter Diamandis, who's the founder of the X Prize, to write this book, Abundance, charting out that if we can harness this acceleration, that we'll soon have an abundance of healthcare, education, clean water, energy in about a decade. And what does the world look like if that's the case? So that's kind of the framing and underpinning of what's happening and why the world is accelerating and where that's going. I'm now on the board of the X Prize Foundation, Peter's foundation, that gives large public prizes wherever there are market failures. A very surreal and interesting set of people there. I joke that every board meeting now starts with, what did Elon just do? And then we move on to the rest of the business of the day. But back to this paradigm, I really want you to anchor in the fact that we now have a dozen technologies operating on this doubling pattern. Okay, solar energy is doubling every 22 months. This Bitcoin doubling right now every day, it seems. Neuroscience, the resolution at which we can image the human brain, is doubling about every year. The speed at which we can sequence the human genome is doubling every 6 months. Drones are doubling every 9 months. And so we now have a basket of about a dozen technologies that are all doubling on a very rapid pattern. The challenge with these doubling patterns is cognitively, we have a very tough time with this. We don't see it coming. It looks linear for a long time, and all of a sudden we call it a black swan. Today we have a very negative example. I mean, the classic story to look at is the chessboard with the grains of rice, where if you double that, you got to a huge amount. And this is the best old example to look at it. A really modern one is if I take 30 steps, I'll go 30 meters. And I can very well estimate where am I 1/3 or 2/3 of the way. But if I take 30 doubling steps, I go 1 billion meters, and I'm 26 times around the world, which is a bit further than 30 meters. And so this is the big shift that happens. We can see today a basket of companies growing exponentially, the Ubers and Airbnbs, and that's why we call them exponential companies. Today we have a very negative example in the form of Corona. The world can now see which global leaders understood exponentials and dealt well with it, and which ones dealt very badly with it. We joke that the amount of time looking at exponential graphs has grown exponentially. So there's a bit of humor for that. But the more important point is we now have a dozen technologies all operating on this pattern. And this is incredibly important, especially for entrepreneurs, because each one is doubling, but where they intersect, that adds a whole other multiplier and opens up a whole product area to that world. So if you take cryptography and computation, mix them together, boom, you have cryptocurrencies. And so there's enormous product areas that open up at the intersections of these technologies. Now, with all of these technologies moving at a doubling pattern, we're seeing 4 major dynamics occur. The first is very obvious. We're digitizing the world very, very rapidly, right? But that digitization comes with an incredible disruption. The best analogy we found to frame this is the shift from film photography, a scarcity-based environment, to digital photography, which is an abundance-based environment. Many of you won't be old enough to remember film photography, but when you go from film photography, where it cost about $1 to process each photograph, took a few days to get your prints back. So you took a click and you had to wait a week to figure out what photograph you took. I know that sounds insane. And now we have digital photography. And when you make that shift, marginal cost of taking a photograph goes to 0. Because of that, the domain explodes and we take billions of times more photographs. But most importantly, the problem space shifts and you shift the business model. So in film photography, you had expensive cameras or books on composition or courses on photography, and you had a whole bunch of business models crop up around that scarcity. The problem we today have in photography is I have 8 copies of my photographs on 10 devices and I can't find anything. And now we use a whole bunch of AI, social techniques, others to filter that down. This transition is happening in all of these technologies and it's happening in all industries. Okay, think about the music industry. We used to sell CDs or DVDs or cassettes, and the music industry was selling scarcity. And you had about 6 major studios selling scarcity. Then we digitized it. And now we have 2 platforms, iTunes and Spotify, selling abundance. And so this is the shift we'll see in more and more industries. And we're seeing industry after industry becoming more and more digital. I don't have time to go into all these technologies. I'm going to touch on a couple so you get a sense of it. In farming, we now coming up with vertical farming and agriculture where we can actually feed a large number of people. It turns out if you take 35 skyscrapers in Manhattan and turn them into vertical farms, that would feed the entire city sustainably. So this is just on the edge of becoming price performant. And for crops that don't travel well, like tomatoes and avocados, etc., this will be a more effective pattern. I mentioned this. This is our old way of doing vertical farming, by the way, much harder. Okay, you want to avoid this if you can. But the really big shift that we'll all see in the next few years is solar energy. Solar energy, as I said, is doubling every 22 months. And it's been doing this for 40 years. Okay. At this pace, we will be able to deliver 100% of our energy needs with solar in 10 years, which will have a massive geopolitical impact. And so this is very profound. Here's the cost of solar dropping like an absolute stone. And the relative cost compared to other fuels is kind of unbelievable. And we can now see this happening in real time. In Chile, they're generating so much solar energy, they're giving it to their neighbors for free. Maybe the most ironic thing I've seen is the Coal Museum in Kentucky is using solar panels. And how do you look in the mirror on this one? But I actually tried to live all this myself. And a few years ago, took a Tesla, drove from Miami all the way up to Toronto. And when I drove up, the car drove itself about 35% of the time. 18 months later, I drove back, and the car drove itself 80% of the time. Okay, same car, same sensors, no change. That's just better software, better analytics. That many more cars have mapped the roads, etc. So there you see Moore's law in live action right there. And the implication of this is quite profound. Think of this idea. I got into this car, which was basically a first-class train cabin. It carried me across the country 80% of the time by itself. And because the charging stations are free, the whole trip, 2,500 kilometers, cost me zero. Right? That's what's possible today with technology. So if you're going to build a business today, build it on top of accelerating technologies, because they will naturally scale and your underlying solution will scale along with the underlying technology. Now, this disruption also has an enormous social disruption, because the technology is all very sexy, but every institution by which we run the world is under threat. Education is broken, capitalism is broken, democracy is breaking, etc. Okay. My favorite joke around this is marriage. We invented marriage as a social institution about 9,000 years ago. When that first appeared, average lifespan was about 23 years old. So 10,000 years ago, you typically lived until 23 years old. So you had kids, you got married, you had kids, and you died. Marriage is not supposed to last 50, 60 years. So the institution of marriage has now outdated the time that it was designed for, and we freak out about the divorce rate, but you're not supposed to live with the same person for 100 years. And so my wife calls it state-sanctioned torture. And so this presents enormous entrepreneurship opportunities, because all of our systems have to be rebuilt from the ground up. And this is going to happen across the board. Here's the incredible progress we have seen via technology. Okay, this is extreme poverty, which has gone from 94% globally to 9% today, okay, which is unreal. And here's just the last 100 years. Unbelievable progress in infant mortality, maternal mortality, etc. And this is all through technology, okay? Now, this also has a huge demonetization effect, where we are kind of changing the game, and the way we use currencies today won't work in the future. And we're going to see a lot of transformation in our monetary systems. But here's the key thing. Look at this that's very unique. For the first time in human history, you know, throughout history, advanced technologies cost a lot. And only a very big private lab or a government lab could afford to do R&D, launch new products and services. Today, for the first time in human history, advanced technologies are very cheap. And it means anybody can innovate. And that means anybody can get into it. Look at Vitalik Buterin, 18 years old, goes and creates Ethereum, $50 billion industry, right? And so massive opportunities coming there. The second thing that's happening in the economy is the acceleration. It used to take 20 years to create $1 billion marketplace. That's now happening literally in days and weeks and months, right? But this is the biggest one, which is where when we digitize an industry, we tend to see huge deflationary dynamics, and the money leaves the system. And you take the newspaper business or the music business, as I mentioned, all the major music studios selling scarcity disappeared, and you have two platforms selling abundance, and the revenues leave the system when you do that. And the problem with this entire paradigm is it's very hard to spot. And this gives incredible opportunities. When the Google car first came out, the cost of that LiDAR unit at the top of that car cost $100,000, and now it's about $10. Okay, and if you want an example of an immune system, go back to the car industry 10 years ago, and try to tell them that this thing that cost $100,000 will basically be free in 10 years, and watch them freak out. They just will they'll give you a white coat and some medicine and put you in the corner. And so this turns out to be very hard to spot, and I'll kind of leave it there for now. But this gives unbelievable opportunity. Every entrepreneur in the world can now take a domain, watch it become digital, watch the cost go to zero, create new products and services leveraged on accelerating technologies, and totally disrupted. And all the technologies are now becoming democratized, so to the point that anybody can now become an entrepreneur. It costs almost nothing today to start a company. Okay, here's one of my favorite examples. This fishing village in Vietnam used to have a big ship come to deliver diesel fuel for their fishing boats. At some point, the ship stopped coming. They basically ordered a solar panel, looked up the internet on how to connect it to their propeller, and invented a solar-powered boat. Okay, so here you have cutting-edge technology in the with very disruptively being used at the edge of civilization. We get super excited when we see this because this is now possible around the world, where people can innovate and build new businesses at very low cost. Look at the Hyperloop. Elon wanting to go from LA to San Francisco in 20 minutes. And really what entrepreneurship today comes down to is a mindset. It really doesn't come down to money or the idea. It really comes down to how bold can you be in building a company. In Elon's case, he's taken on 3 major domains. Let's note he had no experience in the car sector, space sector, energy sector, and yet he's created market leaders in all of them. Okay, and to give you an example of that mindset, with the Hyperloop, he wanted to go from LA to San Francisco in 20 minutes at about 4,000 miles an hour. And I was chatting with him about this. And I said, Elon, I have a degree in theoretical physics. If you accelerate a human being from 0 to 4,000 miles an hour and then decelerate them back to 0 in a 20-minute time span, you're probably going to kill them. And his answer was, yeah, it's an issue, right? I'm relating to it as a showstopper, and I probably would have stopped. And he's like, yeah, it's a problem. We have to overcome that problem. So the mindset of for somebody like Elon basically says, if there's a problem, it's a speed bump. We just go over the speed bump and we keep going. And that mindset allows you to keep plugging forward. And this is the critical part today, because today any entrepreneur can enter a legacy environment with no experience in that domain, apply new technologies, and totally disrupt it. This is the Vega, which is an all-electric supercar being created in Sri Lanka, of all places, that known hotbed of automotive innovation, right? So it really goes to show you anybody, anywhere can do anything today. Then we get to the blockchain, which is open source and free. I think this is the most disruptive technology I've ever seen because it decentralizes authentication. And we have a lot of systems in the world that rely on authentication. If we just did nothing but take land titles and put them on the blockchain, Hernando de Soto has estimated we would release about $30 trillion into the global economy. Just that. Okay, but try telling a government they're not authoritative over who owns what land and watch the immune system attack you. This is the challenge that we have to work on. So you get a sense of the major disruption. How do you apply yourself to this as an entrepreneur? Let me cover that now. You know, David Rose made this comment 10 years ago. He's the godfather of angel investing, and it's been stuck in my head for a long time. He makes the point that all of our traditional organizations are built for efficiency and built for predictability. You want to deliver the same Starbucks coffee in 1 million locations around the world, or the Big Mac, or the same box of Pampers. But today you need to be architected for agility, flexibility, adaptability, and speed. And our old org structures don't match this, okay? And so this is an enormous paradigm shift for how we organize this. So this was stuck in my head, and I noticed that we were building organizations in a totally different way, and hence the book on how we think about this. Here is the model for exponential organizations, and I'll cover this in a couple of minutes just to give you a sense of it. What we did was we analyzed the 200 fastest growing unicorns in the world and said, okay, how are they scaling so fast? How is Uber growing so quickly, or Airbnb, or Waze, or WhatsApp, or Facebook? And we found the following. They all have what I call a massive transformative purpose, like Google, organize the world's information, or Uber, everybody's private driver. And we found that every single one has this North Star, as Simon Sinek calls it. What has you get up at 6 a.m. in the morning to kind of go after solving a problem? Then there's 5 externalities that you see on the right, where Uber doesn't hire its own staff, TED uses community or crowd. Google is using algorithms. Airbnb is leveraging other people's assets. And then you have digital engagement models, gamification, incentive prizes to keep engagement with your user. Think about TED. It was just a nice conference, 1,000 people a year going to Monterey. Chris Anderson takes it over, and he does three things. He establishes an MTP, ideas worth spreading. He then leverages rich media and leverages other people's assets like YouTube and puts all his TED Talks on YouTube for free and gives them away. And then he leverages his community and says anybody can go create a TEDx event. And in 10 years, he creates a global media brand at a cost of zero. Okay, so you can take an established environment, blow it open to a global level at very low cost using these approaches. So those are 5 externalities. Then there's 5 internal mechanisms that allow you to drive culture and manage the control framework. The first is interfaces, like Apple with its App Store developers or Uber with its drivers. It actually forms a sort of intellectual property, how you deal with the communities that you're working with. The second is dashboards. Gone are quarterly reports and all that. We're seeing instruments, companies being instrumented in real time, because if you want to keep the ship moving fast, you want to be very, very key. The direction has to be very hypersensitive. The third is experimentation, which is the whole lean startup methodology, and how do you build and iterate very quickly. Create a hypothesis, run an experiment, and then have a very rapid feedback loop, and also the taking of risk. The fourth one is autonomy, decentralized org structures, and the final one is social, all the interaction patterns we have in the company. Now, if you're a big company and you apply 4 out of these 10, you get a huge outcome. If you're a startup, you should be doing all of these, because if you're not, somebody else is. Okay, the highest rated EXO we ever saw, we actually have a diagnostic survey that allows you to tell how scalable and adaptable is your org structure, is GitHub, which applies all of these attributes, all 11. Just about 10 years old. Microsoft bought this company for $7.5 billion, okay? And here's the killer behind this. GitHub has pretty much 0 workforce, no intellectual property, no assets. Okay, I was talking to the accounting partner who managed the acquisition for Microsoft, and he's like, I don't know what to put on the balance sheet, and he's freaking out, right? So if you can do this, build unbelievable value like this, why are you doing anything else, right? This is what's possible today, where you can actually create and deliver massive amounts of value very quickly. And so we think in the future, all organizations will be EXOs, because the combination of a massive purpose, adaptability, scalability, agility is kind of the holy grail for how we build organizations. And if you're not doing it, somebody else is. So we're pretty comfortable right now standing in a place saying all organizations in the future will be exponential organizations, even government organizations. We found out the Minister of Oceans for Mauritius ran the entire ministry on this model, community, dashboards, algorithms, everything. Okay, so here are kind of 9 headlines for the implications of exponential organization. Number 1, obviously, information accelerates everything. Number 2, we're demonetizing old industries. Number 3, disruption is now the new norm, especially post-COVID. Number 4, the expert will tell you how not to do something, right? Elon doesn't listen to experts. He kind of goes to first principles and says, how do I get a human being from A to B? And you start from scratch. Number 5, death to the 5-year plan. If you do a 5-year strategic plan, by the time you finished it, the plan is out of date. Number 6, smaller beats bigger. Very, very important. And what we see is companies grow, they become platforms, and then they become ecosystems. So Google became a platform and then became an ecosystem. Facebook with WhatsApp and Instagram is now an ecosystem of companies. Look at the companies that didn't become platforms and ecosystems. Yahoo, BlackBerry, Nokia, all failed. Right? So today you have to build a company, and you can see Uber as quickly as possible trying to become a platform. Rent, don't own, like don't have your own assets as long as possible. Trust beats control and open beats closed. This is a big discussion. I won't get into that right now. Happy to touch on it in the Q&A, and everything is measurable today. So we actually decided, let's see if we can apply this. Building an EXO as a startup is an easy problem. We actually went and scored the Fortune 100 ranked by their EXO score, and we found that it correlates to stock market performance. 2 years after we published this study, we found that the top 10 most adaptable, flexible, big companies had outperformed the S&P by almost 3 times. And we just did a 6-year trailing return and found that the market cap of the biggest companies is 14 times bigger than the market cap of the least flexible companies. So this is a huge trigger point. So this will apply across the board in the future. Let me kind of touch on a couple of areas now where you can apply this, and I want to give you some ideas for this. This is the Water Abundance Enterprise that we launched 3-4 years ago. We basically said clean water is an issue, but we can filter water out of the atmosphere. So can you create a machine that will extract water out of the atmosphere, 2,000 liters a day, which is enough for an apartment or a small village, a building or a small village, for less than 2 cents a liter, using only renewable energy. And we typically design prizes at X Prize to last about 7-8 years. 2 years in, this team pops up. We tested their solution. We awarded the prize. So we can now have a machine that will deliver clean water anywhere in the world. And there we may have solved the water problem. I'll give you another example. I met with the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka a couple of years ago. And they were about to spend $500 million to upgrade the port, borrowing the money from other countries. And it was going to take them 5-6 years to upgrade the port. And I said, wait a minute, a drone can carry 1,000 kilos today, but they're doubling every year, every 9 months. So in 27 months, a drone goes from 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000 kilos. An average container is 20,000 kilos. So in less than 3 years, you can just have drones picking up containers and putting them on a ship, taking them from ship to a train. You don't even have to build the port. And so this is the kind of mindset shift that we're trying to instigate. By the way, here's a lovely business waiting to be built by any entrepreneur that might be interested. A final example is this. This is called Welwaze out of Miami. They have created this 8-inch pad for detecting breast cancer. Those dots are very extensive temperature sensors. A woman will wear this left and right side of her chest for 10 minutes. You take a photograph of the temperature. It does a very extensive temperature measurement between the left and right sides. And if you do it every 6 months, the delta of the temperature from 6 months previously, this turns out to be 80% better at detecting breast cancer than a mammogram. Costs about $20, $25, and it's FDA approved. It's fully tested, fully authorized. So we can essentially eradicate breast cancer by just giving this out to every woman in the world today. And so I wanted to give you a sense that's what's possible today, of how radically we can change old domains. And we see this pattern of digitizing, disrupting, demonetizing, and then democratizing. Okay, so I hope I've given you some sense of it. We have a fundamental choice in the world today of how we operate as a global society. We either have a Mad Max path by following old scarcity models, fossil fuels, et cetera, and we're going to wipe ourselves out if we go down that path. And you can see that happening in cough, the US and other places. Or we have a Star Trek path where technology can deliver us ultimate energy, clean water, healthcare, education, etc. And the constituency that's going to be able to shift us from Mad Max to Star Trek is entrepreneurs. And so I appeal to you as entrepreneurs, think about this, take on an MTP, and I'll give you the steps that you take to build an EXO. Number one, pick your MTP. What big problem do you want to solve? What has you wake up at 6 a.m. every morning and saying, I want to solve that problem? Number two is go create a community around that problem space, say it's curing cancer, or join communities that are already trying to solve that problem. Number three, create a founding team of people, like-minded, 2 to 4 people that are passionate about that problem. Number four, find a breakthrough solution that's at least 10 times better than the status quo. If you come to market with an idea that's 10% better than the marketplace, it'll ignore you. If it's 10 times better, they can't ignore you, okay? And then you operate an MVP and follow lean startup principles after that, iterate quickly, and test and pivot very aggressively. So that's how you go about doing that. Let me pause my sharing, and I've left a good, decent chunk of time to go into Q&A, and happy to bounce to that. Stephen, I don't know if you want to moderate that. And while you're finding out the first question, I'm just going to go close the curtain behind me so I don't get blinded here.
Awesome. But no, definitely powerful talk and definitely lots of little bright minds are popping up here. Some questions in particular, and I'm going to condense them because sometimes they kind of sound similar. But for traditional businesses, somebody asked, how do we start that shift? Let's say for a restaurant or Main Street businesses, or let's say a virtual staffing company that are kind of in the traditional sense, how can they start shifting, or what would you recommend?
I'll give you one of my favorite examples it was a Soul Cycle company that had a studio with Soul Cycles in it. And of course, with the pandemic, people can't come in to the studio. The company's in big trouble. You shut down. What do you do? And the owner got very creative and said to all of his customers, I will rent you the bikes for $200 a month, and take the bikes home. And then when the pandemic lifts, we'll all come back together again. So they've all taken bikes home. He's running classes virtually, and they'll get back together again when we're allowed to. So there's an example of a very creative change in business model. You see the same with restaurants doing deliveries and all the innovation coming around that. So that's how you think about it from that perspective. But from any business, if you think about what the future holds, there's a set of industries that are accelerating very rapidly and going 5 years ahead. All the digital models, like Zoom and collaboration and working from home. Here would be a great example. I would love to have an office in a box that had good soundproofing and a mic built in and a camera built in, and I could just set it up with a green screen, and then I don't have. And a lot of people would buy that box so that they could just have a thing, soundproof for my kids, etc. And so there's a million business models that appear. When you have disruption, you also have opportunity. And I think with infinite disruption that we have today, we have infinite opportunity, which is where I get excited.
Got it.
Now, let me finish the bigger. If you're a bigger company and you have to transition this, you have to solve your immune system problem because your people don't want to make a change. And we've worked out processes for that. And we have a book called Exponential Transformation that takes the 10-week sprint that we run with big companies and totally enables it for everybody. And so we found a model where you can take your leadership, culture, and management thinking and move it 3 years ahead in 10 weeks. And at OpenEXO, which is our community that Stephen is a part of, we have a community of about 7,000 consultants around the world that are certified and trained in this EXO model who can help you build your company or transition your older company. OpenEXO.com is the website.
Yep, and we're sharing those websites on the chat. For a business that is looking through the 10 attributes, and the 11th would be the massive transformative purpose, the MTP. So out of the 10 specifically, if they had to start somewhere, what do you think could be the first one to kind of gander, or the first three?
So there's a couple of different ways of answering it. Number one, and most importantly, figure out your MTP. What is your massive transformative purpose? Look at BlackBerry. My thesis about why BlackBerry failed is they never had an MTP. They never had a big purpose. They became really huge, and then they were like, okay, now what do we do? And the whole thing just collapsed, right? You look at Google, they have an MTP, and they just continue plugging away, trying to organize the world's information, or Apple, think differently, etc. So the MTP is the most important one. Then there's a couple of different ways of going about it. Community is absolutely critical today because you use the community to learn, and they will tell you what products and services they want to see coming from you. And you can essentially just build a community and service that community. They will then go do what they do out in the world. Now, we actually have an Australian company called Smart Group, which is about 300 people. And what they do is every quarter, they create 10 projects based on all the attributes. And then every quarter, they re-up the projects. So they have a constant stream of projects happening in algorithms, dashboards, and they're asking, okay, how are we going to apply dashboards to our company this quarter? And how are we going to apply algorithms to our company this quarter? And they just go like that. And so that's another way of looking at it. So there's a few different models around this.
Great. And I know we've been focusing a little bit on the entrepreneurs, but now for entrepreneur support organizations, when it comes to incorporating that into their curriculum, you have universities or others that do programming like incubators and stuff for the entrepreneurs. How can they begin to kind of start shifting this in, or starting to implement some of this stuff?
You mean in companies?
Let's say in their educational material.
Okay. So I have a dim view about teaching entrepreneurship. It's like driving a car. you can't do a video on driving a car. You have to get in the car and freaking drive the car, right? And get better by using it and doing it. I think entrepreneurship, more than anything, is a doing exercise and an experiential exercise. The biggest problem is, in many parts of the world, if you build a business and you fail, you're a failure. The reason Silicon Valley is successful is if you build a business and it fails, we call it experience. And so changing the cultural mindset around the relationship to entrepreneurship in a lot of the world will help with the failure side of things. But there's no question that what's happening today is Elon Musk is demonstrating that anybody anywhere can do anything, right? The market cap of Tesla just shows you how disruptive you can be in any industry in the world, despite all the odds being against you and the market being against you and the investors being against you and the short sellers being against you and the regulators being against you, etc. The car dealers hate you, and you still can have a massive outcome. So there's really no excuse today. Pick the problem you want to solve and just go. And that's what we'll need to change the world as we move forward. And I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I'm happy to delve into it further.
Yeah, no, thank you. And kind of going into some of that stuff, there's always those barriers. And so this kind of still within the entrepreneurship support organization view, but also a barrier when it comes to, working with government. When you hit that wall of people they're not believing this, or they're just not seeing it, or it's not clicking for them, any way to engage them or to start getting them to see things, anything you found useful, any best practices or stuff to lower their barriers.
So if you get run up against either market forces that are against you or regulatory forces that are against you, the classic way of going about this is go find a beachhead of some small subset of customers or users that are excited about your product, and establish that beachhead. Kevin Kelly calls them 1,000 true fans, right? If you can get 1,000 true fans of your educational product or your collaboration software or whatever, then it gives you a beachhead to anchor on and slowly build from that. The world is moving so fast today that you can just keep trying until you hit the piñata. Right now, for example, if you tried to, there's about 60 companies trying to do things like Zoom was doing. Okay, some combination of feature footprint and market timing and having the right strategic advisors and the right focus had Eric and the team at Zoom succeed in the face of Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and everybody against you. And so you have to be relentless about the focus of the problem you want to solve and just go after it and ignore other people, ignore the regulators, ignore other people, unless it's going to put you in jail. But route around it as much as possible and just keep plugging away. Very few people know this, but when Larry and Sergey were trying to raise funding for Google, there were 12 other search engines out there. And every investor said to them, you're going to come in and with 12 search engines? Come on. They did 350 investor pitches before somebody funded them. Okay. So 350 times they went to investors and somebody said no. And my favorite thought experiment is, what if they'd stopped at 340 and we didn't have Google in the world? Or how many other entrepreneurs stopped too early and didn't push that last level of persistence down? So I would say, if you're passionate about a problem, just keep plugging away.
Now, somebody from Peru, Jabar, is asking about live experiences. So tourism has taken quite a huge dip this year because of COVID. But for them to, what's the best way to utilize this time? Any thoughts there on the tourism and live experiences industry, I guess?
So I think there's a massive opportunity, and I think we'll start to see virtual reality tourism really take off in this next year. We're still a year to year and a half away from being able to travel properly, but you can give people really amazing virtual experiences of being in the Peruvian Amazon, right? For Peru specifically, I would get heavily into ayahuasca tourism. That's a big deal these days, and a lot of people will fly there or take it remotely. And the question comes, how do you take what you have capable and available to you and make it available to a broader audience? And I think VR is probably the best way to go. Like if you did a full-on virtual reality experience of what it's like to be in the Amazon jungle, high resolution 360-degree view. It would compel a lot of people to want to go there. Marriott Hotels has actually set up a booth in London where you go on a virtual, they put it outside a church, and you go on a virtual honeymoon. You get married in the church, you come out, you step into this virtual booth, and you can be on a beach in Hawaii or surfing in Australia or something like that. And so I'd look to things like that to solve the tourism problem.
Got it. And I know a few questions have come in as to how they can start kind of learning or upskilling their mindset to be more EXO minded. I know you mentioned the website. You also mentioned the book. Can you talk a little bit more about that as to how they can upskill?
Yeah, we have a free course called EXO Foundations that gives you the basics of the model and allows you to get started quickly. So I would go take that course. It takes 2-3 hours, watch a few videos. We give you a badge saying we certify you as an EXO thinker. And then you have the entire community that we have that is like-minded to think in this way and build companies that are scaling fast. Let me give you the key economic thesis behind EXOs, just so you have it in your head. You know, when you're running a business or building a business, you're worried about demand and supply. And very specifically, the cost of demand, the cost of supply, right? Hopefully you want to be on the right side of that equation. When the internet came along, something magical happened. It allowed us to drop the cost of demand generation exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing, every Silicon Valley company is trying to go for a viral loop, and then your acquisition costs go to zero. And with the internet, for the first time in business history, we could acquire customers at zero cost, which was kind of magical. What EXOs have figured out is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially, okay? So you take Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is almost zero. If you're Hyatt, you have to build a hotel. Same with Waze, same with Uber. And so EXOs have figured out how to drop radically the marginal cost of supply. So if you want to pick the thing you're most passionate about, say curing cancer, and say, okay, how can I deliver a product or service to market that radically drops the cost of supply, and boom, you have a huge success on your hands.
Great. And I know there's other opportunities like OpenEXO, meetups. I know there's a chapter in DC that we're trying to launch in 2021, but can you talk a little more about the meetups and how that can be helpful?
Sure. So we have a whole ton of events and meetups happening all over the world. We have 7,000 people now. We're doing an event this Saturday, by the way, for parents all around the world. So it's called Surviving the School Year. Because if you're a parent, all your strategies of babysitting and carpooling and play dates and date nights just like all vanished, right? And so we're doing an event for 3 hours. It's www.survivingtheschoolyear.org. Tickets are $7. And we basically brought together the world's leading experts in parenting to help parents globally. So come and join that if you're a parent, or tell people about it if you know parents. But we have a lot of events online and offline where people can get part of the community and understand what's going on and join local groups in various countries, various languages. We have very strong contingencies in Brazil, in Portuguese, and in Latin America and Spanish, etc.
And I know we want to be mindful of your time and really appreciate this joining us today and this week for Global Entrepreneurship Week. I guess the first step, it sounds like to get more involved, openexo.com would be the first step.
Yeah, our community is openexo.com. It's free to join. The kind of introductory courses are all free, and you'll find a kind of a crowd of like-minded people trying to build EXOs around the world. It's pretty clear, as I said, that in the future, all organizations will be built in this model. And in 6 years since the book came out, we haven't seen anything come along that overtakes it. It's more of a meta model. And then the question is now, how do we now apply that to all organizations, all industries, government organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, that are purpose-driven, adaptable, scalable, and so on. And the economic thesis shows, and we have a lot of proof points around that. So we're pretty excited about where the world goes forward. And we're open sourcing everything that we do so that anybody can pick it up and run with it. Okay.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you so much, Salim, for your time. Any parting words for the audience of entrepreneurs, entrepreneur support organizations, some policymakers?
So policymakers, figure out how to make it easy for entrepreneurs to fail. I built a company in India once, and when the company failed, it took me 7 years to legally shut it down. I'm not likely to set up a second one in India. In the US, it's relatively easier to allow a company to fail elegantly, and therefore you have that many more people trying. That's number one. Number two, if you're a successful entrepreneur and you've made success, do what happens in Silicon Valley and give back to the community and mentor other entrepreneurs, because it is a very hard task. Entrepreneurship is one of the hardest things in the world, because you're breaking new ground. By definition, the status quo will hate you. You're taking unbelievable risk, etc. And we should celebrate that much more than we do. I think it's the most important constituency in the world. And when I look at the world globally with this Mad Max Star Trek kind of bifurcation, it's only entrepreneurs that are going to be able to create the new business models and mindsets and new products and services that tilt us from A to B. So God bless you and whatever you're doing. And any way we can help, we're here to help.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. The links are in the chat, all the resources mentioned, even the survivingtheschoolyear.org resource. And stay tuned for the Open EXO meetup in Washington, D.C. We'll be sharing that shortly. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you, Salim.
All right.
Really
thank you.